Katie. Oh, Katie's there. There you are. Okay, Katie. All right. Okay. So I think we're ready for a. So welcome to the Village Board, special Village Board meeting at 6 o'clock. I'll ask the clerk to take the roll call, please. Trustee Bachner.
Here.
Trustee Kargi.
You're on mute, Tom.
Trustee Kargi.
Here.
Trustee Vasquez.
Here.
Trustee Brennan.
Here.
Trustee Hennick. Trustee O'Connell.
Here.
No Trustee Hennick. Okay, right. President Adduci. Here. Okay, if I can ask all to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Kind of fun to see people. I was like, oh, there's. Right. Okay. Welcome. We have no citizens' comments here. Not for the 6. Do we have for 7? Just 2. Okay, I didn't see that. Okay. 2, yep. Okay. So no citizens' comments. So we'll move on to since it's a special village board meeting. We'll move on to the consent agenda. If I can have a motion and a second to move consent agenda item A through D.
Motion to approve the consent agenda items A through D.
Second.
Okay, any questions or comments on A through D? Hearing none, I would ask the clerk to read it and then take the vote. Consent agenda item A, Village Board of Trustees meeting minutes, April 26, 2021. B, amendment to Title V, Chapter 10, Village Waterworks and Sewerage System of the River Forest Village Code in regard to water and sewer rates ordinance. C, ratification of ordinances approving the fiscal year 2021 to 2022 annual budget for the Village of River Forest and the fiscal year 2021 to 2022 compensation plan ordinance. D, resolution supporting restoration of local government distributive fund revenue resolution. Trustee O'Connell. Yes. Trustee Bachner.
Yes.
Trustee Kargi.
Yes.
Trustee Vasquez.
Yes.
Trustee Brennan.
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay, very good. There are no items on the consent items for separate consideration. There's no recommendations of boards, commissions, and committees. And we have unfinished business. This is the approval of the flag policy regarding use of the village flag pole. So I will, if I can get a motion to approve the flagpole display policy.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the flagpole display policy. Second.
Okay, Sarah? Well, I'll be darned. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. So at the April 26th Board of Trustees meeting, there was consensus to move forward with the preparation of a flagpole display policy. The policy before you this evening is based on the sample policy from Pittsburgh, California. Some superfluous information was removed, and we added item 5 regarding the number of flags on the flagpole. And the idea here is that the pole supports 3 flags when they're lowered to half-mast. So a commemorative flag would replace the village flag only in the event that the flags are lowered. So if the board agrees with this policy, elected officials would make requests for flying commemorative flags by emailing the village president and village administrator. And then I would just remind everyone to be mindful of the timeline involved and to make the request with enough time in advance of the dates to fly the flag in order to get it on an agenda for the board's consideration.
Sarah, I have one comment about the policy.
I support the policy, but the language in section 3, I don't think says what we want it to say. The way I read the language in section 3 is that it says the only place that this commemorative flag can fly is at River Forest Village Hall. And I think that we want to say the only place in River Forest that applies to is the River Forest Village Hall flagpole, because it's taken from the Pittsburgh document, and that document had some other language saying, and it doesn't apply to these other flagpoles within the town or city of Pittsburgh. I think we're intending to say the only place in River Forest where we want to apply is the River Forest Village Hall flagpole, not the only place where this flag can ever fly in the whole wide world is in the River Forest Village flagpole. So one suggested revision could be something like, this policy is intended to relate exclusively to the Village of River Forest Village Hall flagpole. And that would remove that ambiguity.
But given that we don't have the authority to tell anyone else what they can fly, I mean, I don't disagree, Katie, it's not that big a deal, but obviously we only have authority over our flagpoles. We don't have authority over the school's flagpoles or anything else. So I don't mind the change, but I don't know that it's necessary.
The other thing that I'd like to add in here, so we don't have the staff running around, I think we ought to put a timeline on, submissions. So if you're looking to have it, in whatever, January 1st, within 90 days prior to the date, you have got to submit so we can approve it, as opposed to, somebody bringing it in the night before and expecting us to adopt it. So I'd add that in there.
Okay. All right. So let's address Trustee Brennan's issue first, and then yours, Trustee O'Connell. I think I think Katie brings up a good point, and I hear what you're saying, Tom. But I think for clarity purposes, I think we should make it clear. Even though you're right, we don't have authority over other flagpoles, but why go down that rat hole when we don't have to? So I would propose that we take what Katie just said and clear it up.
Yeah, if I could offer a suggestion in that regard, President Ducey, perhaps section number 2.3 could read commemorative flag approved under this policy, new words, under this policy for display through a commemorative or honorary resolution by the village board shall be displayed exclusively on the village hall flagpole. Therefore, it's clear that we're only talking about flags under this policy. Trustee Brennan, would that address your concern?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Say that again, maybe.
Sure. So section 2.3 would read commemorative flags approved under this policy for display through a commemorative or honorary resolution, and then just continue on as is.
So are we getting rid of section 3 then?
I was proposing leaving it there and just adding the words under this policy after approved in the first line. I think an alternative would be to just strike it as well, section 2.3.
I think you could probably just strike section 3. Because if we don't strike it, it still leaves the ambiguity. And Tom's right. We may not have control over the other flags in the village, although we do have the control over the one at the pumping station, but we don't have control over the ones at the schools and at the park flagpole, et cetera. I don't know that section 3 helps us in any way.
Well, does it define that it's, well, you bring up an interesting point because there is a flagpole at the pumping station. Are we saying just here at Village Hall? Yeah, Public Works, pumping station.
Right. So the first sentence in the policy establishes that we're only dealing with the River Forest Village Hall flagpole, which is referenced again in the third sentence before the policy begins.
Right.
So striking that section 2.3, that's an acceptable outcome. The policy still works as intended. We're only talking about the flagpole outside of here, unless the board, wants to do otherwise.
So if you strike 3, though, where does it say just the Village Hall flagpole?
In the first sentence of the policy.
In the top of the policy.
Right up top.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fine.
Are we going to strike 3?
It seems like it's reasonable.
Yeah,
That's
Yep.
fine.
Seems reasonable.
Then that solves my question of unintended consequences.
Okay. Yep.
I
Okay,
guess my
then,
question is, Kathy, why are we
Yep, go ahead.
limiting the request to only village board members? Obviously, residents can reach out to us, but what's the difference of having a resident just send the village a request and then having the board vote on it?
Sarah, do you wanna? I think the idea behind that is to get board support prior to a request being made, and to ensure that the village board is following through with the direction that it is, the policies and the language that it is putting forward.
And maybe I was gonna add, is it also to the effect that if the public requests it, it turns it or may convert it more to a public forum versus a non-public forum? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, the village has a better position that this is government speech when it emanates from the board, as opposed to a member of the public. It's also, as Sarah said, a screening function.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an important
I
piece
agree.
of this. Okay. Okay, so Trustee O'Connell, you said you'd like to make sure that there's a parameter. I'm sorry.
Oh.
If you can repeat what you asked for?
So I think we should establish a time frame in terms of, you know, when this would be approved. So 60 days prior to an event, 90 days prior to a placement. I mean, again, I don't want, you know, the village staff is taxed enough. I don't want them to have to address something with a week or two's notice. So, I mean, I think, you know, by the time somebody is going to create a flag and, you know, do all the things they're going to do, you know, they're going to do that well in advance. So I think they ought to give us the courtesy also of being able to address it sooner than later.
Okay, so where would we establish that in the
At the end of section 2.1, you have the sentence, the village board shall only consider a request if it's made by a member of the village board. I think after that, you could add your timeline. Any such request must be made at least
30 days?
so many days.
Well, it has to be at least 30 days, because to get to the board table.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And if there's a flag someone already has to be displayed, that's relatively easy to execute within that time frame. If it's not a flag that has already been created, if at any point staff is asked to create a flag or get something printed, I would think we'd need at least 30 days, at least.
Depending on where it lands in the board meeting. Oh, well, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter, it's 30 days. So,
I'd be more comfortable with 60.
I'm fine with 60.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm fine with 60, that seems reasonable.
The only thing that I question with that, and I'm, you know, generally not opposed to it, but if for some reason the board did feel like it was important to act or display a flag for whatever reason we wanted to, and do that within the 60 days, do we have an option to do that? And what I'm, thinking about here is we've been talking about this for a little bit, and we know that we want to have the gay pride flag up for this June. So if we put the requirements there, then we're in violation.
Or it can always suspend its own rules. So in that rare instance, I think a part of the vote would be agreeing to suspend the rule.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So when it comes before the board for approval, what you would do then is waive the 60-day requirement and approve
Correct.
the action.
To your point, Erica, that's something we've been talking about a while.
Right.
I was like, someone's speaking, I can't hear them.
Oh,
I'm muffled. It was me. I said, this is something that we've been working on for a while. So, I mean, I think, you know, we could take the one exception, as everybody said, and deal with it and right now, and then, you know, going forward. But it's just more about the staff and the amount of time they spend on stuff.
Yeah, like I said, I completely agree with the thought, Bob. So it's a good thought. I just, in case there might be something else in the future where as collectively as a board, we want to, so it makes sense with the waiver of that. And then I guess that's my question around this too, is that Would it be at our next meeting where I could introduce this then for June? Like,
Yes.
are we, okay.
Yeah, I would do it next meeting. I think that's a good idea. That gives us,
Right.
because we then want to put it up. Okay, so we'll do 60 days and then you have a waive it if we need to
Yeah.
based on requirements. Okay, very good. All right, so then with those changes that we just did, I don't know if you want to restate that.
Yes.
So for the record, and then ask the two, who moved it? Did you move it?
I made the
second?
He moved, I second.
So,
the two changes that have been discussed by the village board would be to add at the end of section 2.1 that a request must be made at least 60 days before village board consideration unless shortened by the village board. And then the other change would be to strike section 2.3.
okay, very good. Then that's accepted by
Right,
you?
correct.
And then you're
Yeah,
second? Okay,
I
very
agree.
good. Okay, so then we'll ask for the vote. Trustee Bachner,
Yes.
Trustee Kargi,
Yes.
Trustee Vasquez,
Yes.
Trustee Brennan,
Yes.
Trustee O'Connell.
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay. All right, so then, under new business, we have, a motion here to, waive, approve the agreement with Christopher Burke Engineering. If I can get a trustee to move and second, item 8A.
I move to approve an agreement with Christopher B. Burke Engineering for a not-to-exceed cost of $168,504 and authorize the acting village administrator to execute the contract agreement.
Second.
Okay. So do you want to give a little update on this?
Yeah, I'm gonna turn it over to Michelle Foster.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Sure, can you guys hear me okay?
Hi, Jeff.
All right, so if you'll bear with me, I'm sure most of you recall, I'll walk through kind of the history of how we got to this point as briefly as I can, and then we'll dig into the proposal itself and the process that will be entailed with the actual stormwater master plan itself, and kind of give some detail on that. So starting last year, we had, I'm sure everybody recalls, we had a couple of very heavy rain events. We had one in May and another pretty decent sized one in October. So everybody's wheels started turning as far as stormwater is concerned a little bit more than in a typical year. Once it was kind of decided that we needed to do something, staff brought forward the discussion to the board about doing a stormwater master plan. The idea being that all of our efforts in the realm of stormwater would kind of be pointed at the same direction and towards the same goal. So we started that conversation last year, and staff began to create procurement documents in accordance with the qualitative bid selection process. Basically what that means is, we started to put together our request for qualifications and our request for proposals. We did things a little bit backwards. We started with the request for proposals and brought that to the board initially last year. And when we had that discussion, the board directed staff, to go out to the residents and see what additional input they might want to have. So we put the request for proposals on our website, and we held 2 public meetings, one in November and one in December of last year. Got some feedback from those meetings, and ultimately the few kind of tidbits of information and feedback that we did get from the residents were incorporated into the request for proposals. We issued the request for qualifications, which is kind of step 1 in this process, about mid-January this year. And we had 9 submittals come in from qualified engineering firms. Staff took a look at those 9 submittals, and basically what we did is we kind of shortlisted that 9 down to 4. We then took the request for proposals that we had created, and we only issued it to those 4 firms. We issued it on late February, the 25th, and we got 4 submittals. Those 4 submittals all came in late March. Staff took a look at those 4 submittals, ultimately came to the conclusion that the one provided by Christopher Burke Engineering was the optimal one. Based on qualitative quantitative bid selection process requirements, you're really not supposed to look at pricing until you've settled on a single firm. So we kind of followed the letter of the law on that, looked at the Burke fee submittal after we settled on Burke as the optimal submittal, and the fee submittal also was within our budget. So there was necessarily no need to negotiate at the time, and we've not done so yet. The village has worked with Burke on numerous other projects, obviously with the Northside Stormwater Separation Project a few years ago. Obviously had a good experience with them. It seemed like all the feedback we got from residents was positive along those lines as well. So that obviously came in with as a good reference, and then staff checked a few other references relative to stormwater master planning, and all the feedback we received on those reference checks was also positive. So in terms of the general process of the master plan here, I'll kind of walk through how things are going to go on a very broad basis. We start out, we're going to have a community meeting. So first staff has a kickoff meeting with Burke and their team, make sure we're all on the same page about how we're going to move forward. Then shortly thereafter, we'll have an initial community meeting, basically to solicit some more resident feedback. We've already gotten a good amount of that. We've incorporated that into the bid documents, but there's always room for more feedback. So that's one of the first steps that we'll take on here. Beyond that, Burke has also incorporated into their proposal, and it wasn't something that the village had necessarily asked for. So that was kind of a nice thing for them to have included. They're going to put a questionnaire together, and something that we'll be able to put on the village website, and then they'll manage the results of that as well. So just kind of another means for folks to provide some feedback that may need to be incorporated into the plan. From there, we'll get into flow monitoring. They put monitors within some of the sewers that we have in town based on optimal locations and kind of collecting as much representative data as possible. Right now, their proposal includes 6 locations. We can always ramp that up if we feel necessary, but in discussing that with Burke staff already, that seems to be kind of a good place for us to start. So flow monitoring is also kind of a big step in that initial data collection process. Once we do complete all that data collection, they basically begin to create a computer model of our sewer system. And then they use the flow monitoring that they've done to help calibrate it. So we did the water system model a few years ago, kind of along the same lines. We established, pipe elevations, pipe sizes, and then we can compare what we know to be true with resident feedback. On X date, I got this much water, in this street in front of my house. And then the flow monitoring, all these things kind of help calibrate that model to basically get a very representative model in the computer of what our sewer system is and how it operates during rain events. From there, we start to identify potential capital improvement projects that the village can undertake to address any shortcomings that are identified in that model. Basically, we're going to have to figure out how much protection do we want the sewer system to be able to provide. Do we want to be able to take on a 25-year rain event, a 100-year rain event, a 5-year rain event? That's something we're going to have to hone in on as a village. And then part of the master plan is to establish, if you want to create a 10-year level of protection, this is how much storage we need to provide in these areas. So these are some potential projects you can take on to do that. They'll also give us some conceptual cost estimates with that as well. So it's preliminary. The projects and the costs are very preliminary, but starts to point us in a direction that we need to head based on how much protection we want to provide. Some of the other things that they're going to look at also include analysis of current staffing levels, the village's stormwater ordinance as it currently is enforced, as well as the feasibility of a potential stormwater utility fee as a funding source for these future projects. Once completed, we'll have a second community meeting that'll be held to share those findings about the capital improvement projects or the potential capital improvement projects, as well as the money that would need to be behind them. So we will be able to share that with the public. And then shortly after that public meeting and soliciting a little more feedback, the Burke group will come back and we'll have a presentation to the village board. All told, this This will take about a year. Right now, we're looking at the schedule in terms of starting in May here. We look like we're wrapping up right around April of next year. So this is definitely a big investment as far as time is concerned, but certainly something that I think would be a good long-term solution for the village as it relates to stormwater. So as a result of staff looking at these proposals and walking through the QBS process here, we're recommending contract award as indicated in the board packet to you this evening. So if any of you have any questions, I would be happy to address those at this time.
Hey,
Jeff, I have a couple questions.
Hang on, Katie. Hang on for 1 minute. Okay. Please, Bob O'Connell. Go ahead. Bob, first. Sorry.
Jeff, nice job. I have a couple of questions.
You gotta be.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I gotta speak in, so maybe bring it in a little bit.
Better.
Thanks.
I have a couple of questions, just real quick. Community meeting, you guys have done this a lot where we'll hold, a multiple community meetings. So would this be, you'd offer it up for a couple of nights, so, 1 or 2 nights, so all the community could weigh in on it? You have 2 community meetings in there.
Right now, we have 2 built into the project scope. We have 1 on the front end and 1 kind of on the back end. If we want to split that 1 on the front end up into kind of 2 meetings just to provide a little more availability, I don't really see that being a big problem, but certainly something we can work in.
Okay, and then you mentioned a questionnaire, so that's a questionnaire going out to the residents, asking various questions about how things function in and around their homes.
Correct.
Okay. Just one suggestion, and maybe they already have it put together, is, can they create, that would go on the village website, kind of an FAQ of, kind of the process, and then if there's issues, who they contact, so on and so forth?
Sure. I do not see a problem with that as well.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. Katie?
Yep. Jeff, the materials from Burke talk about their experience with ordinance review and specifically how tear downs can then increase and then rebuilding can increase impervious area that can cause flooding and drainage problems for neighbors. I wanted to make sure that in the materials, say that they can give recommendations for potential policies and ordinance revisions. I want to make sure that that's included in this and it's not an add-on, that we're already paying for that and that we will be getting that.
Correct. The analysis of the current stormwater ordinance as it relates to development is included in this scope of work. Great.
Okay. And then also, there's also something in there about they wanted to us to know if we have to, they wanted us to install a weather station if we don't already have one. And that might be the same thing that they're referring to later in the materials about a rain gauge network. Is that the same thing? And do we have that already?
It is. We do not have one owned by the village. I believe one of the elementary schools has a gauge that's tied to weather bug. So that's something that's on my radar to talk to them about. I've also done a little bit of homework. If we did have to get a rain gauge that can calibrate things to the degree that would be needed, it looked like it was a few $100, so not a major outlay, but certainly something we would try to kind of piggyback off of existing infrastructure for.
Yeah, because it says that they want us to start collecting that information as soon as possible to catch the spring rains.
Sure, and I should mention, I've already reached out to them, assuming and hoping tonight goes well. I've reached out to them about having a kickoff meeting later this week. So assuming the board approves this tonight, that's something we would try to get going as soon as possible. Just, the rain gauge is one thing, but the flow monitoring as well. Spring, though this has been a dry one, spring is typically the rainy season that you want to capture via flow monitoring. So the sooner we can get those in the ground, the better. So a whole lot of reasons to get this moving as quickly as possible, but those two are kind of definitely at the top of the list.
Great. And then the final thing I just wanted to mention is that the materials talk about the modeling approach being sort of the key, the main thing here. And they reference the city of Skokie a couple times on that page. I think it's just they made a mistake in their drafting. They didn't update. They used a template from Skokie, but they really mean River Forest. And I can tell they really mean River Forest because they've updated it to River and the whole rest of the document. But, Skokie is 4 times larger than River Forest. And to the extent that they have language in there and their pricing is based on Skokie. I just have to point out that we have to confirm with them that this pricing is based on River Forest, which is 1/4 the size of Skokie.
Sure, certainly something I can reiterate to them at our kickoff meeting.
Thanks. It's on the modeling page, page 38 of the packet. Their document doesn't have page numbers, so I can't tell you what page.
Sure. I know exactly what you're talking about. Those typos always jump out at me.
Jeff, it's Erica. I have a question as well in relation to pricing. So you mentioned that they will be having us consider, how much of a capacity we want to look at from 1 year to 100-year storm events. And I think that I would like information at some point around what it means to be a 100-year storm event. I think we've had several of those in the past 12 years that I've lived here in River Forest. And so maybe just including, what climate change and those expectations, what that might look like for us in River Forest and the Des Plaines River, and just being very, aware of that.
Sure. A couple of things I'll throw out there in response to that. One, this is the rainfall data, if you will, has been updated in recent past. So we're using updated rainfall data to help model things. So this is, that's in a vein of trying to capture climate change and increasing intensity rain events. So we're trying to capture as much of that as possible to the degree that we can. And to give you a little bit of perspective, typically new storm sewer is designed at a 10-year level of protection. That's kind of the rule of thumb. You start to increase that level of protection and your cost benefit ratio starts to change pretty dramatically. So to provide a 100-year level of protection starts to get very pricey very fast. Honestly, I think our existing combined sewers, based on when Burke did the work at the north side stormwater or storm sewer separation project, I think they found that the current sewers that we have up there provide like a 2-year level of protection or something like that. So realistically, I think if I were a betting man, I'd say we're probably somewhere in the 5 to 10, maybe, a 15-year level of protection, realistically speaking. But ultimately, I'll certainly see if I can get some general cost parameters or at least differences so that would be associated with those different levels of protection.
Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Okay. Any other further questions? Okay. Hearing no further questions on this, thanks, Jeff, for presenting it, and thank you for the good questions. I agree with Erica. The whole purpose of this is to kind of get a good idea for the next 20 years how much protection for flood mitigation we could afford over the next 20 years. And I also think something like this will help us really hone in on our capital improvement projects better as we look at the sewer projects. So. Okay, I think it's a good project, and I appreciate it, Jeff. We need to make a few of those corrections and clarifications, but I think overall it's something we should pass tonight. So with that, I'd ask the clerk to take the vote. Trustee Cargi.
Yes.
Trustee Vasquez.
Yes.
Trustee Brennan.
Yes.
Trustee O'Connell.
Yes.
Trustee Bachner.
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay. I think that it ends our special board meeting. So if I can get a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. Trustee Vasquez.
Yes.
Trustee Brennan.
Yes.
Trustee O'Connell. Yes. Trustee Bachner.
Yes.
Trustee Cargi.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned. Very good. 36. So we have about 20 minutes roughly. So you're more than welcome to come back in anytime, and we'll see you at 7 o'clock. It's a separate Zoom meeting. Yeah.